Everybody. I think we're gonna start soon, maybe like another minute or so, just for like stragglers to come on in. But yeah, thank you so much for being here. Happy Earth Day, y'all. Oh, we're gonna start with some announcements. Is there a screen? Should I wait for the screen to be back up? But it's Earth Week. We just want to let everybody know that there's a lot of things happening like this month and like this week. And we're probably gonna be giving extra credit. So check in with your facilitators if you like want to seek some extra credit opportunities for going to like a webinar or like an event or something. A lot of good content out here right now with like people trying to organize things. ESLP is trying to organize things, and I know like orgs as well are trying to do things as well. So yeah, check in with your facilitator to see what you can get extra credit for. If you all could go to the next slide. There we are. In preparation for your midterm, you should be having all like reflections for every speaker. It will be collected with your midterm, which is next week, and then we're gonna be giving more details about the midterm, like at the end of today's lecture. So just stick around for that. We also really want you guys to fill out this survey, this art Google form, just to solidify like which art you're gonna be attending for the rest of the quarter, and you guys can find that at the top of the syllabus. So yeah, please do that by today. Also, the facilitators will probably be sending out reminders for that too, for you guys to like fill this Google form out so we know like where people are like gonna be staying in their arts. And that can be found at the top of the syllabus again. So please do that. It's much appreciated. And yeah, 2 units also have determined reflections. Reflections are for everybody. So be sure to have a reflection for all speakers. They're gonna be due with the midterm. And yeah, to get started on today, we're gonna be having Mark Lopez. He comes from a family with a long history of activism, was raised in Madres del Este de Los Angeles, Santa Isabel, which is the mothers of East LA Santa Isabel, MELASI, an organization co-founded by his grandparents, Juana, Beatriz, Gutierrez, and Ricardo Gutierrez. This sets his trajectory as a community activist. He was engaged in a wide array of student activism in UC Santa Cruz, where he earned his BA in environmental studies and taught university courses at UC Santa Cruz, Cal State Northridge, UCLA Extension. Mark earned his BA, his MA from Chicanx Studies Department at Cal State Northridge, where he completed his master's thesis titled "The Fire Decolonizing Environmental Justice." Mark joined East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice as a member 3 years before joining the staff. Sorry, I'm losing my place. After serving as a lead organizer for East Yard Communities and co-director with EYCEJ Co-Founder Angelo Logan, Mark accepted the executive director responsibility, and he organizes in the area he was born in, raised, and continues to live. So please give it up for Mark. Thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, for sure. Thank y'all for having me. This is definitely a funky format. This is the most people I've ever talked to on Zoom at once. And it's also a little funky because I'm very animated when I speak. And that's really hard to be very animated in like a little box. So bear with me, it's different. I think I like to transmit a lot of energy when I do public speaking engagements, and I'm not gonna be able to do that in the same way here. So again, forgive me for that, bear with me. Couple of disclaimers. One, there's going to be stuff that's going to come up that might be triggering, right? And it might be triggering because you relate to the experience, you relate to what the trauma is to be in our communities, to be impacted by multiple systems of oppression. I imagine a whole lot of you are going through that shit right now, and so it's a lot. So I want to acknowledge that, because that's the shit we're dealing with in our communities, and that's that's what we're going to be talking about, right? On the flip side, the other trigger warning is maybe not so much in this class, because y'all are like intentionally taking this class, intentionally engaging in these topics, intentionally opening yourselves to this experience. But I also went to Santa Cruz, so I know sometimes folks can intentionally do that and then also intentionally be like, this is fucked up. There might be things that you hear that you're like, nah, this was exaggerating. This was lying. It doesn't work that way. The world doesn't work that way. That's not real. I might say things that are radically different from how you see the world. And so what I would ask is to hold on to that feeling, right? Hold on to it and continue to engage. The worst thing is you can I'll say something and you're like, man, done with this fool, because everything I have to say builds on itself, right? So if you dip out of the conversation early mentally, you're gonna miss the point, right? And so I would just ask y'all to stay engaged. I might say some shit that you're gonna be thinking about tomorrow, or you might be thinking about it over the summer, or you might be thinking about that shit in 2 years or 10 years. Feel free to hit me up. At some point, I'll share my contact info. Feel free to hit me up. I'm down to engage. I'm not just here firing shots. The intention is to point at wounds and say, we need to heal this, right? And so I want to take responsibility that I might be opening up shit for people here. And in the past, I'll stay after a talk like this and spit game with folks for however long that takes after the talk. Whether the building shuts down or not, we got to go outside and do that. I'll do that. This is a little different because we can't like get into a small grouping outside of this Zoom, right? Unless y'all reach out to me. So again, I'm down to engage. There's a caveat to that. If you're coming from a position of privilege, I would ask that you do some of that work before you reach out. Because oftentimes there's a reaction on like, damn, what y'all are doing is fucked up. What can I do? And I'm just like, man, I'm trying to figure my own shit out. Like, I don't have the plan for you. Do some lead thinking and come to me with an idea. Like, yo, I thought what you said. Here's an idea I have. Does that make sense to you? That's something I can engage with. I can't give you a plan for you to implement, right? So I'll just ask that you do some of that lead work. And that lead work should take you home. Now that's for everybody here. If I don't say it enough, I'll make sure to say it up front. Whatever you think your actions need to be, take that home. Start that at home, right? And I think I come from an experience. This is one of those moments where like, don't just shut off right now. But I come from an experience where I've had in these public speaking engagements, white folks come up to me and they're like, what can I do to like help save your community? Like, I want to be a teacher. And I'm just like, don't come to our hood. Like, don't come be a teacher in our hood, right? I got a lot of homies who are from our communities who are teaching in charter schools because they can't get jobs in public schools, right? Go teach at the school you went to, right? Because I can't go to that school. I can't walk in there and say what I'm going to say here and be as safe as you would be going there and saying that, right? So that's the access, that's the privilege that some of y'all will have. And you can speak to other folks who have access and privilege and hopefully get them to betray that privilege, to betray those systems of oppression that benefit us when again, some of us can't do that and be safe, right? And so it's hard work. It's kind of funky. If you got a question about that, hit me up after. At some point, there'll be a Q&A. Cool. Let me open up these little comments because I don't know if y'all feeling me or you're like, damn, this was whack. Cool. All right. There was also I went to Santa Cruz, class of 08, but I was there for 5 years, so all the folks I came in with graduated in 07. I'm an Oak student. I'm one of those obnoxious ass Oak students that will walk around campus yelling Oaks at everybody. That's me. So just so y'all know, that's the energy I'm bringing. Cool. That's what's up, Marlene. I don't know where you're at on this thing, but I see you. Or Marlene, I'm not sure, but cool. So we're gonna do this. We're gonna do our first breakout. And the facilitators, I don't know how to get everyone to break out, but the facilitators are gonna handle this. But on this breakout, what I want y'all to think about is today's Earth Day, right? So what I want you to think about is, how did you first hear or find out about Earth Day or just environmentalism in general, right? And then if you have time, what are your thoughts? What are your feelings? What are your ideas around Earth Day now, 50 years from when it started? So I want y'all to think about that, and that's what you're gonna share in the breakout. And I don't know how long that's gonna take, but I'll leave that to the facilitators to let us know how long we need to be in that breakout. Cool. So now, breakout.
You want to take us away, Mark?
Cool. So that was interesting. I don't know that we have enough time to kind of get into folks sharing back, so I hope that was helpful for y'all. But so I wanted to share something with y'all that was how I first got introduced to Earth Day and environmentalism. And it's definitely showing my age because it's an older reference. It's like, 20 years old or something like that, probably older because I was real little when this came out. But I'm going to share my screen. I think that'll work. Are y'all seeing my screen now? Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
Let me know if y'all could hear this.
Biodome, a pure, self-contained environment where 5 scientists are about to be sealed off from every conceivable form of contamination, except one.
Oh, check out that mall, man.
Our dream is finally at hand.
What kind of mall is this?
Get them out of here!
The doors are sealed for 1 year. We're stuck here.
That's right.
12 months?
Yes.
52 weeks?
Yes.
385 days?
Now, the whole world is watching as Bud and Doyle are separated from their loved ones. Learn about endangered species.
They're the rarest Lepidoptera in the world.
Cool. So I'm gonna unshare my screen now. Or how do I stop? Oh shit. Stop share. Cool. So that movie Biodome came out when I was about 10 years old. And that was the first that I really got introduced to environmentalism, understanding like concepts of homeostasis, and it tripped me out because I grew up in the movement, right? As y'all heard from the bio that was read earlier, I grew up in what is now identified as environmental justice before environmental justice had a name, right? I found out what environmental justice was when I went to Santa Cruz. I found out because I was an environmental studies major, and in one class, there was one slide that was titled environmental justice. And and it had the logo of the organization that my grandparents helped found, right? The logo that I have tatted here on my arm, that was the logo that my aunt drew originally. And I tripped the fuck out, right? Because what I understood was a huge disconnection between environmentalism and what we were doing in our communities. Even though academics, philanthropy, right, funders, even though they identified what we were doing as environmental justice, that wasn't necessarily something that my family, my community was doing. Later, folks got together, put some principles together, adopted that name, moved that forward, right? But even through that, that was out of a necessity to distinguish what was happening with mainstream environmentalism and what was happening in our communities, right? So it was a trip when I went to Santa Cruz, because I forgot about this movie by the time I went to Santa Cruz, but it kind of reminded me of that, because I was sitting alone in big ass classrooms, being the only or maybe one of two students of color in the environmental studies class, right? I remember having an experience where they're talking about invasive species, right? And they're talking about invasive species come into a habitat and have certain characteristics that allow them to outcompete the native species. And so they take over, and the native species don't have the protections so that they can maintain themselves, and they get completely moved out, right? And so I'm hearing this and I'm looking around and I'm just like y'all ain't feeling this? Like y'all don't see parallels here? Like y'all don't, okay, this is kind of weird, you know? And I even remember looking over at the one other person of color in the class, and I never talked to this fool ever. Like we never shared a word, but during that lesson, we looked at each other and just kind of like nodded like, damn, this is a fucking trip, right? And then part of our assignments were that we had to go and take out some invasive species, right? So we're out there and they're explaining everything around taking out invasive species. And I'm just like, y'all are decolonizing the land without any type of like social understanding of what it means to decolonize the land. It was all biological, right? It was all ecological. My bad. It was all ecological, right? And that tripped me the fuck out. And those were really important and formative experiences for me, right? So ideas around environmentalism were very basic, were very shallow when I was growing up. And in a lot of ways, that was reinforced through my experience, right? So yeah, if y'all want to understand some more of that, Google me, find my master's thesis. I break a lot of that stuff down, so I'm not going to get that much into that. But I wanted to make sure to share that for you to kind of set some context. So I'm with an organization that's called East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice. That's East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice. I'm gonna take this background off now, actually, because I don't want to be holding this light to me this whole time. Give me a second. Perfect. Cool. So I'm with the organization that is East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice. Shout out to the homies from East Yard that are in the class right now. Laura. Who else is up in here? Diana, Taylor. Cool. Lupe's up in here. Shout out to you, Lupe. So East Yard is a community-based organization that is the 501c3 nonprofit arm of a community-based movement, right? The nonprofit status doesn't completely contain what we are as a movement, but it is a very effective way for us as communities to fight back. And so we use this arm, right? It started in 2001, but it's based on family, friends, church, park, school networks that have existed for decades before that, right? And it started because there's a rail yard that's called the East Yard in East LA in the City of Commerce. And they call it the East Yard because it's on the east side, right? So it's the East Yard, where the communities around it, that's the East Yard. So it started prior to this and way back, it's Tongva land and will always be Tongva land, right? That's the first peoples of the area. Before World War II, this area was Japanese farms, right? And then in World War II, Japanese Americans were rounded up and put into internment camps, right? The closest one here in California to us is about 5 hours away, and it's called Manzanar. And now they've actually made it into a museum. So I definitely encourage y'all to go visit that at some point in your life to understand what's happened in the past here, and to also understand what's happening with ICE and immigration and deportation and all of that stuff, because it's very similar. So when Japanese Americans were put in these internment camps, anything that they couldn't physically take with them to the internment camps was no longer theirs, right? And so what that means is folks couldn't pick up the land and take it with them to the internment camps, right? And so the land was stolen, effectively stolen, and Union Pacific was able to come up on that land. And that's how that land transformed from farmland to a rail yard, right? And it was described as a sleepy rail yard for a really long time. But then in the 90s, the North American Free Trade Agreement was passed. And this is a trade agreement between the countries in North America, but it had large implications with the rest of the world in how trade functioned. And so what we saw specifically in LA is that manufacturing gets decimated, right? A lot of the warehousing that now exists used to be manufacturing. Now it's just a parking lot for Walmart, right? So 40% of all of the goods that are imported into the US come through the port of LA and Long Beach, right? So what that means is we have 50 to 60,000 trucks driving through our communities every day, delivering these goods to the warehouses where they get rearranged, put back in those big metal boxes, and then taken to the rail yard and shipped out to the rest of the country, right? And so what that means is from the rail yards, from the freeways, from these trucks and trains, we have tons of air pollution, tons of noise pollution, tons of vibrations, and tons of light pollution, especially around the rail yards, because they have stadium lighting, which means the homes around the rail yards are never dark, like ever, right? And so all of these things have impacts in the community. And so asthma rates start to increase. Cancers start to pop up at rates that weren't seen before, that folks were not familiar with. And so all of that created the necessity for a community response. And the community response was the formation of our organization. And our organization back then and to this day is grounded in three questions. Those three questions are, what is it? How does it affect us? And what can we do about it? And if we can answer those three questions, then we can build a movement. And that's exactly what we've done over the last 19 years of existence of the organization. We've built a regional movement, we've helped build a national movement, and we've even connected with folks internationally around these issues. Our folks aren't necessarily experts, right, when they come into the movement, right? The organization is called, let me type it right here real quick so y'all could do your Googles. And then y'all can do your socials. So there's a huge emphasis in capacity building in leadership development because folks aren't being taught, A, this air pollution is an issue. Yo, these health impacts that you're facing, that shit's not hereditary, that shit's environmental, right? We're not being taught these things, so we got to teach ourselves these things. There's a big emphasis on that. Because ain't nobody coming to save us, right? I tell folks all the time, we're not dolphins, we're not polar bears, right? We're not whales. Like, no one's coming to save us. We're the ones that have to defend ourselves and fight back, right? So there's a big emphasis on that as an organization. And we function in East LA, Southeast LA, and Long Beach. So if you're from East LA, if you're from Southeast LA, if you're from Long Beach, get at me, connect, come through. Let's get down. That's what's up. Cool. So yeah, so I threw a lot of stuff out there. I have a formal presentation. I could get into that, but before I get into that, I want to see if y'all got any questions. I try to keep it as brief as possible. I'm gonna give y'all like 10 seconds to let me know you got a question. Yeah, you could put questions in the chat or you can unmute yourself. The 3 questions to start a movement, if somebody could write them in the chat while I say them, that'll be cool. What is it? How does it affect us? And what can we do about it? So if you can answer those 3 things, again, that's how you could build a movement. Cool. All right. So if y'all don't got no more questions, I'm going to jump into the presentation. So y'all going to see a bunch of slides. I will let you know that I'm not traditionally like a linear speaker. I tell a lot of stories. That leads me to other stories. I remember things. People ask questions. That helps me because then I know what I need to say. I was telling some of the facilitators earlier that I prepared what I think I need to tell you, but your questions, your engagement, that's really what's going to tell me what I need to tell you. So I really encourage y'all to ask questions, ask for clarification, or just like, what the hell's going on? How will someone get involved with the organization? If you're from the East Side, if you're from Southeast LA, if you're from Long Beach or the Long Beach area, including Wilmington or Carson, we have membership meetings that are monthly in the different communities. And of course, right now with COVID-19, they're digital. We use Zoom as a platform. You're welcome to come to these meetings, all right? That's how you get involved. Show up, meet folks, introduce yourself to folks, right? I think sometimes people find it a little funky because they expect to be told what to do. People are very used to being told what to do. And so you want to be told how to be involved in East Yard. But East Yard is a movement, and it's based in whoever's involved in the movement, right? And so for us, more than a particular campaign or a particular program or a particular activity, the relationships that we build with each other are the base, right? So a campaign is a vehicle for building community. A program is a vehicle for building community, right? A project is a vehicle for building community. And the way that we build community is by building relationships with each other. And by building relationships with each other, we're accountable to each other. If I know you and I fuck with you and you got something going on, I got to show up for you. The way that I would expect that if you know me and you fuck with me and I got something going on, you're going to show up for me, right? And so you need to build those relationships before you can just jump in, right? And so you come through, You introduce yourself. You'll meet other folks. You'll catch the vibe. You got to come out a couple of times, right? And you'll connect with folks, and that's the way to do it, right? And if you stop showing up, folks will ask where you're at, right? And it's not to be like, oh, they're not down. You know, they stopped showing up. They're not down. Folks got life. So folks don't even like, oh, nah, yeah, you know what? They fucking opened up UC Santa Cruz again. So they're back at school. They're not at home no more, right? Or, yo, they got some health issues with their family, so they're taking care of that. Or, yo, they had to pick up another job. Or, yo, something, right? And then when you come back, people will be like, where you been? And it's not to be a jerk, to be like, oh, you're not down, right? It's because folks want to see you, right? Folks, you're now part of their community. Because, yeah, for me, a bunch of us live on the east side, but there's so many fucking people I don't know on the east side. Are they part of my community? Yeah, to a certain extent, through certain ideas of what community is. But the people that I know, that's a whole other level, right? The people that I build with, the people that we fight with, that's a whole other level, right? So showing up, that's how you get involved. If you are from East LA, Southeast LA, Long Beach, again, hit me up. I hardly use this account. What is it? That's my like public Facebook page. I won an award that gave me a lot of visibility, so I like made all my social media private, and then created this account as a way to people to engage with me. I get like a million funky messages there all the time. So I prefer to get them there than to get them in my private account, right? So if you want to connect, if you're from these communities, hit me up there, and then I'll connect you with either Laura, who is a community organizer who was on earlier but had to leave because there's a meeting in Linwood tonight, or a virtual meeting for our membership down there. Or if you have a question or something, that's going to be the place to hit me. My bad if I don't hit you back right away. Hit me with another message. If you got to hit me with a third message or a fourth message or a fifth message, please do that. I'm not ignoring you. It's just hard to filter through shit sometimes. Cool. Can we get hired during the corona? We're not currently hiring anybody. So there isn't an opening. We're also not firing anybody, so that's a good thing. Yeah, cool. Any other questions? Nah. I could see some folks. I could see y'all saying nah. Cool. All right, I'm gonna jump into the presentation. I'm gonna share the screen. Please feel free to interject at any point. Cool. So the title of the talk is Sustaining Capitalism or Sustaining Communities, Consistency in the Time of COVID-19. At the bottom there, you see our social media account at EYCEJ. The hashtag we most often use is hashtag we are just trying to breathe. Breathe has an E at the end. There are a couple of posts that are we are just trying to breath. But we are just trying to breathe is the primary one. So check that out. Hopefully y'all got a screen grab of me with the biodome background. Please share that, tag me in that, or tag us in that. Cool. So how the fuck do I move this way? Sorry, I'm like trying to move y'all's faces because it's blocking the text there. So coronavirus and environmental white supremacy in LA County. I prefer this term of environmental white supremacy. Sometimes folks like to use the term environmental justice. I really dislike that term. I think it's a safer term than environmental racism. And why do we need to use a safer term? Who are we trying to make feel more comfortable? So, and it's environmental racism, right? We understand that that's based on a system that system is white supremacy. So it's environmental white supremacy, right? So how does coronavirus interact with this? Here's a map of the LA County area, and it's a heat map, right? So the darker areas are where there are more cases of the coronavirus. The lighter areas are where there are less cases of coronavirus. If you're familiar with the LA County area, you will notice that this area, the west side, and especially as you get into the wealthier areas where the Kardashians live and where Drake lives and all of that, right? When you get down into the peninsula, Palos Verdes and that area, these are wealthier areas. These are areas where they're having more people with coronavirus. Why? One, these people tend to do international travel, right? They traveled over the holidays, right? They went on ski trips or whatever wealthy folks do, and they came back. They have access to testing, right? They're able to get tested. That's an issue in our communities, right? Where I was literally talking to somebody from the county about why they don't have any testing in Southeast LA, and they're like, oh, it's because there's no hospitals. There's no hospitals in the area, so if somebody gets tested positive, there's no local hospital or clinic for them to go to. So I'm like, what the fuck? Like, so y'all don't want to find out people have the Rona, because then that exposes that the whole healthcare system is not serving our communities. So you'd rather just not find out. That's fucked up, right? So it's access to testing, and all of that is predicated on wealth and privilege, right? Now, the next map I'm going to show you that's going to come up above it, it has a different type of heat to it. Did that work? I hope that worked. Let me see. Motherfucker. There you go. I spent a lot of time learning how to do that. So I'm like, y'all gonna see this. Cool. So what you see is the hottest areas for the coronavirus are the coolest areas for this map. The coolest areas here indicate that these areas have the least exposure. Sorry. These areas have the least exposure to pollution, right? They have the lowest pollution burden, and they're the least vulnerable. The areas that you see as red now are the areas that have the highest pollution burden and are the most vulnerable to that pollution burden, right? So these are areas where specifically it's scored on asthma rates, it's scored on levels of poverty, it's scored on rates of education, it's scored on language isolation. Language isolation meaning folks are not fluent in English, right? So this is the Cal Enviro Screen 3.0 map. This is a map from the state government that shows what environmental white supremacy looks like. They don't take race into account, but if you know LA, you know these red areas are where people of color are at. You know these areas are where low income people are at, right? And so you might think, well, what does like rates of education or language isolation have to do with you being vulnerable to pollution, right? Pollution pollutes everybody, right? Nobody is safe from pollution, right? And that's just not true, right? That's something that we say to say everybody's implicated in the solutions, but not everybody is affected the same way, right? So rates of education and language isolation, what that has impacts on is our protection. Are these government agencies providing us the same protection that they're providing wealthier, whiter communities? And the answer is no, they're not, right? Companies are deliberately looking to come into our communities because they know that the government agencies that protect our air, that protect our water, that are in charge of toxic substances, they don't protect our communities in the same way. So they can get away with shit that they can't get away with in other communities, right? And I'm not saying this as like, this is what I think is happening. I'm saying this as, this is what I know happens because I work with these fuckers all the time, right? I talk to these folks and they're literally telling me we're not doing testing in Southeast LA because there ain't no hospitals in Southeast LA, right? Which is very similar to one time I was at a public meeting and I said, Exide is the biggest public health crisis in the state of California. And you don't need to know what Exide, Google it if you want to know what Exide is. That's not important to the story. But one of the people from the California Department of Toxic Substances Control came over to me and said, you know, that's not really true. And I said, it's not true. Exide isn't the biggest public health crisis in California. Then what is? Because Exide is impacting at least 100,000 people in LA, exposing them to lead. 100,000 people in LA. So what's bigger than that? And that fool was like, I can't tell you. And I was like, the fuck do you mean you can't tell me? And they're like, well, if you ever bring it up, the state won't acknowledge it. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? And they're like, the state won't acknowledge any problems that they can't fix. Because if the state acknowledges a problem and it cannot fix that problem, you have a failed state. And I was like, fuck. So they're like, the only way you're going to get the Department of Toxic Substances Control to acknowledge that there's a toxic issue in a community is if they're able to do the cleanup. And if they can't do the cleanup, if they don't have enough money to do the cleanup, they will deny that that issue exists. And I was like, God damn, because that's what the last couple of years have looked like in this Exide fight. So I'm like, okay. Now I see the games that y'all play. And if you think a bit about it, right, you could look at multiple issues in our communities, and that's going to be true. They're going to tell us that having 35 kids in a classroom is okay because they don't have the money. They're not dedicating the money to our communities for smaller class sizes. So they're going to tell us it's okay. Right? If they dedicated that money, they'd be like, actually, yeah, that's just not okay. You should have like no more than 23 students in the classroom. Why? Because at Bell Gardens High School, they received a grant. And they received a grant so that they could reduce certain class sizes for certain subjects. And this grant was a study. And what the study found is when you reduce the class sizes in these core subjects, the graduation rates increase. You know what happened at the end of that grant? The class sizes went back up. Why? Because they stopped receiving funding. The grant was over. So they had proof that smaller class sizes work, but they don't have the money, so they're going to continue the practices that are failing our students. Right? And having access to education is going to be critical for defending ourselves from these toxic polluters. Right? All those things are tied in together. Cool. Let's see what I got for y'all next. Cool. The earth is healing. We are the virus. The shit's trending, right? So let's do breakouts. Can we do like just a quick like 3-minute breakout? I don't know if that's possible for the folks who control breakouts. So just a quick 3-minute breakout because there's been this really like kind of almost like not a call to action, but just a visibility for like COVID-19 has exposed so much about human behavior. So the question is pretty much like, how have you seen the earth healing while COVID-19 is happening? That's the question. So can we do the breakout? Cool. See you on the other side. Are we back? We're still waiting for some folks. We're good? Okay. So in the breakout group that I was in, Romina shared something that I was like, damn, that's like, you fucking hit the nail on the head. So I wanted to ask her if she could share that. Let me actually stop sharing my screen so then y'all can see her. So Romina, if you could share.
Yeah. All right. So in the breakout group, we talked about all the benefits we've been seeing for the Earth, and before we closed, I said that I've been journaling about that broken systems are meant to be broken in order for new ecosystems to come together. For
sure. I think that just it really, that is a call to action in the moment, right? So I think that's really important, and I appreciate you for sharing that. And so the importance in that is that we're seeing in very tangible ways the difference in our world, and in that way we're able to see what's possible. And I think a lot of us are like, we don't just want this to be a moment, right? We don't want this to be an exception, right? We don't want it to be like, oh, remember that one time we could see the mountains, right? Or remember that one time the water was clear, or remember that one time I could breathe, right? Like, we don't want that to be the case, right? So here I have a picture of LA, right? One is in the 90s, one is last week, and it shows the difference. And it's not just an aesthetic, right? But that does seem to be what a lot of folks point to, is the aesthetic, right? And so I think that's the kind of first part of my critique with how heavy the social media presence has been of this concept of the earth healing and this idea that we are the virus, right? Because for a lot of us in our communities, we're not feeling this, right? Because the oil refineries are right next door, because the rail yards are right next door, because these sources of pollution are still based in our communities. And so we're still breathing that in, we're still impacted by that, right? And so while we've seen stuff like dolphins returning to Venice, right, which of course later was like, they're not really returning to Venice, but it's kind of nice to think about the earth is healing. Or my personal favorite graphic, right, the Hudson River. I think that really it's like, hold up, we're living in a real context, right? It's not just like magical, everything is different because we're inside now, right? And I think once we start to kind of break through that a little bit, we can start to understand where did this idea of we are the virus come from, right? And so for me, when I started seeing these posts around we are the virus, it brought me back to this book that's called The Population Bomb, right? And I don't know if you are familiar with that, but The Population Bomb is a book that's essentially saying population growth is the reason why the earth is being degraded, right? And so if there wasn't as many people in the world, we wouldn't have a shortage of resources, and we wouldn't have these contamination issues, and we wouldn't have these natural environments being degraded, right? And a lot of this rationale is at the foundation of environmentalism 50 and over 50 years ago, right? And a lot of this is actually based on xenophobia, right? The fear of the other, the fear of the foreigner, the fear of the immigrant is what a lot of this is based off of, right? And a lot of this stuff is connected to eugenics, which hopefully y'all have taken classes that have taught you about eugenics. I'm not going to get into that now, right? But a lot of that is what's at the basis of white supremacy. So environmentalism becomes a vehicle for white supremacy, right? And it's important for us to understand this, because then we can look at this idea of we are the virus. Who is the virus, right? What does resource consumption look like? Who holds the responsibility for the amount of pollution that we're seeing in the world, right? What is the top 1% using compared to the bottom 50%, right? What is the top 10% using compared to the bottom 80%, right? If we start to look at that, then we understand that we're not, like, human beings in general are not the virus. And we can start to understand certain behaviors as the virus. We can start to understand certain worldviews as the virus. We can understand capitalism as a virus, right? That is exploiting people and the planet. That is what allows capitalism to flourish. And it can't flourish without the exploitation of people and the planet, right? And that's where we find ourselves in this moment. So from that standpoint, we can start to push back, right? We can start to formulate ideas for what the future looks like. So even while, yes, there's benefits to the air, there's benefits to the water, there's benefits to the land that we're seeing right now from the change in our behaviors, right? What we're also seeing is that our communities are still under attack, right? The issues that we're facing now with the Rona are the same issues we were facing before. They've just been magnified, and they've just now been brought in to include more people. Issues of access to food and basic needs, that shit's been an issue. People have been in a crisis. It's just not all of us have recognized it as the most important crisis because it hasn't affected a whole lot of people, right? ICE raids, immigration raids continue to happen in our communities. Our neighbors, our family members, our friends continue to be kidnapped by immigration and put into facilities where their health is being compromised, even when we're facing an unprecedented global pandemic. They're operating as usual, right? Accumulation of debt. This has been something that has been killing our community forever, right? And now, what's happening with all of our bills? That shit's accumulating, right? Even in places where there's eviction moratoriums, you're gonna have to pay that rent back, right? And so what's happening is you're just accumulating it 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. They're gonna give you 12 months to pay it off. That means your rent just increased by 50%, right? How are folks gonna get out from underneath this debt? Is gonna lead to exploitation of people, right? Underemployment, been facing that. Evictions, been facing that. Over-policing, we've been facing that. Inequitable education, we've been facing that, right? And of course, polluters stay polluting. That's what's happening in our communities right now. And it's important to understand that because we're not in a new world. We're not in this kind of new reality where there's everything has changed, right? I was telling folks, everything's changed, but nothing's different, right? What I mean by that is everything has changed as far as the possibilities, but nothing's different for our real lived conditions for a lot of our folks in our communities. And because of that, that's where we need to base our fights in. Cool. So it's important to understand that every single one of the things that I listed here is about resource management. Access to food and basic needs, there's enough food to feed everybody. It's about how that resource is managed. ICE raids, it's about managing people. It's about managing bodies, and it's about managing labor. That's what ICE raids are about. Accumulation of debt, it's about resource management. and go all the way down, every single one of these things is about resource management. And what resource are they trying to manage? Is capital. At the foundation of every single one of these issues is the ability to accumulate capital is what's driving all of these forces. Cool. So how are we seeing this in the environment? The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency issued a public notice that basically monitoring is voluntary now for polluters, and enforcement is discretionary. So US EPA staff will enforce at their own discretion. This is sick, right? As it is, US EPA has been degraded with the Trump presidency. So many people came to California after Trump got elected, right? All the folks I would talk to at US EPA, they all came back to California or had never been in California, but came over here because they're like, fuck DC. We don't even know if this agency is going to exist anymore, right? And I remember talking to a group of folks, and it was kind of weird because I had just won this really big award, and that's why they were letting me speak to this group of folks. But it was a bunch of EPA staff, and they looked sad as shit. This was probably about 6 months after Trump's election. They looked so sad. And so I kind of started talking shit to them. I'm just like, yo, like, I know a lot of your colleagues have come to California now, or they've left to California because I was in DC at this point. But that's not what we need. We don't need you to come to California. We need you to stay right here. Because the reality is, Trump isn't going to shut down the EPA. What he's going to do is he's going to fill the EPA with people who think like him or who will follow his lead. And those people will stay in the EPA for the next 40 years. And what that means is we're going to be fighting these people for 40 years. What that means is my babies are going to be fighting these people. So what we need you to do is we need you to stay here and we need you to fucking hold your ground, right? That's what we need from you. And the energy change, and that was really cool. But obviously, when US EPA comes down with this notice, it's a huge issue. Because as it is, they don't enforce in our communities. As it is, polluters can literally get away with murder in our communities. And now the US government, head of US EPA, is telling its staff, don't trip, right? The one thing that is open for us here is that this doesn't affect our ability to file lawsuits against polluters. EPA is just saying, we're not going to do our job, but they're not legally saying that we can't do their job for them. And oftentimes that's what we got to do anyways, right? So I think that's really important to note here. Because the South Coast Air Quality Management District took that away from us. The South Coast Air Quality Management District is the government agency that regulates air quality in the LA Basin. What that means is Orange County, Riverside County, San Bernardino County, LA County, and I think a little bit of Ventura County. They govern the air quality. They're supposed to protect our air. What they actually do is sell our air. They sell our air quality, right? So they released a notice about fast track permitting. So what fast track permitting means is they've done away with the typical process for getting a permit to pollute. And what they've done is they've taken away our ability to engage as the public. They have impacted the California Environmental Quality Act. Because the California Environmental Quality Act and the National Environmental Protection Act, they mandate that there has to be a public comment period. They mandate that there has to be a way for us to engage, to find out information, to ask questions, to make statements, and at the end of the day, if shit's not right, to sue them. What South Coast AQMD has done is said, don't trip about that process. We're going to fast track it. If it has to do with COVID-19, you're in and out. What the issue here is, because of course, if fucking Budweiser is going to start producing hand sanitizer, handle that shit. Right? If I don't know, a shop that does upholstery is going to change to doing protective masks, handle that shit. But all of this is up to the interpretation of the staff of the South Coast Air Quality Management District. And we don't trust them. The reason we don't trust them is because, similar to the head of EPA, they come from pollution. They come from polluters. The head of the South Coast Air Quality Management District right now used to be an attorney for a bunch of the polluters in LA. Actually owns stock in some of the polluters in LA. So what the fuck is this fool doing being the head of the agency that's supposed to protect our air? What type of leadership does he provide to his staff in the agency? The fear is now they could say anything is for COVID-19 and fast track these permits. And once they get that permit, they take away our ability to sue, to stop the process from moving forward, or to even get redress from these companies after they commit these issues, right? So there's this whole thing about California is an island, right? California is the fucking nation state, right? The governor started saying that shit. California is a nation state. We are the antithesis of Trump. But if you actually look at what's really going down in California, it's the same shit. It's the exact same shit, if not worse. So what we did is we activated, for us to keep the visibility going, we activated hashtag toxic business as usual. And what this does is it works to point out where we're still seeing pollution in our communities. Because at the same time as people are posting pictures of the San Gabriel Mountains or the Hollywood sign or the downtown skyline that they couldn't see before, for a lot of us, we still can't see that shit. For a lot of us, it's not about seeing it, it's about what we're actively breathing every day, regardless of what we can see. Because a lot of these contaminants we can't even see. We're being exposed to them and we can't even see them, right? So we started activating this hashtag as a vehicle to continue to raise the visibility around this issue, right? And it's not just here. These are some of our folks in Chicago. They fought to shut down a coal-fired power plant. And they were able to do that some years back. And the coal-fired power plant just kind of sat there, right? And then they decided that they were going to knock it down. And when they decided they were going to knock it down, well, everybody was doing isolation in their homes. So they exploded the building, knocked it down, and you just have this huge plume of dust, which has lead, arsenic, zinc, asbestos, right? You name a heavy metal, that shit's gonna be in there. So it's contaminated the community, right? And from talking to folks in Chicago, because we get down with them, it feels like it's retribution. It feels like punishment, like, oh, you wanted this knocked down, right? You wanted this gone, boom. Now it's all over your community. And the reality is, unless they come out and clean up that soil, like literally remove the soil and bring new soil in, folks are gonna have that shit present on their yards, on their roofs, in their blood for years, if not generations to come. How do I know that? Because that's the shit we're dealing with right now at EYCEJ. Again, Google that if you need to understand that more. Cool. I'm running low on time, and so I'm not sure if I should just skip through some stuff to make sure we get to some of the other points and then open back up for Q&A. I can send y'all the presentation. You can send it out so folks can read it. I'm gonna skip that one because it's important, but I already shared a little bit about there not being facilities in Southeast LA. The county put an isolation center, so they're basically bringing people who have tested positive to COVID-19 and housing them at a hotel in this community. That's literally the only thing that separates this facility and the middle school is a parking lot, right? And across the street from the middle school is homes. And a block down is the supermarket, right? So it's creating a potential hotspot for COVID-19 in a community that doesn't have any testing for it. Y'all can read that when we send it out because the facilitator said we could do that. So meeting the moment and building the movement, this is what we've been working to do. Social cohesion has been critical, right? Us having put in the work to do community building has allowed us to stay consistent in this moment. And social cohesion is about us having each other's backs, right? It's about us being able to check in with our family, check in with our neighbors, check in with our movement and make sure that people are right? And so here at East Yard, that's what we did up front is our organizers did an assessment of our core membership to assess the needs. And from that, we identified that 80 families in our core membership had immediate needs. And we started to work towards distributing resources for those needs to be met, right? And they range from toilet paper because folks didn't have access to toilet paper to rent, right? Rent is a big issue for folks. And I think one of the positives that's kind of come out of this is we're starting to talk to each other a lot more about our community-based foodways. So a lot of us grow food. We have a program that's called La Cosecha Colectiva, or the Collective Harvest. It's a decentralized community garden. It's decentralized because a lot of the available land in our communities is contaminated. So we can't just put a bunch of shit in the ground. It's contaminated, right? And so we started growing in people's homes, and then through our membership bodies, that's how we're able to share the produce. So we're understanding that we need to do more to reinforce that, given the crisis that we're dealing with. And then a lot of energy is being spent on community stability. So before the Rona, community stability looked like fighting for rent control, fighting for just cause, fighting for small business retention, fighting for workforce development, right? So folks could get jobs, access to jobs, local hire to guarantee that people were in our communities were getting these jobs, and then land trust so we could get collective ownership over the land. What it's looked like after the Rona or through the Rona is pretty much all of that. Plus we're fighting for eviction moratoriums so people don't get displaced. And then we're fighting for debt forgiveness. And that's kind of the harder part, because debt forgiveness would mean somebody's not getting money. And the reality is folks are less concerned about people not paying than they are about people not getting paid. That's where the issue is. Because people are able to exploit real estate, that is what's being maintained, is the exploitation of real estate, right? And so what we're fighting with is issues of access, issues of resource distribution, and we're fighting some of the basic tenets of capitalism in the way that we're doing our community work, right? This is a lot of stuff. I'm not going to get into all of it. I'll just talk about single-use plastics real quick, because I think that's like an environmental topic that maybe some of y'all are familiar with. We're part of a coalition that's looking to end single-use plastics in Los Angeles. And we were brought into the coalition just to be real, because the folks who have been fighting to end plastics, there's been a bunch of white folks, folks who are wealthy, folks who are not the majority of LA. And so plastic straws doesn't seem like a priority to folks who are just trying to put food on the table, right? So how the fuck am I gonna go to somebody and start talking about plastic straws when there's an oil refinery next door, right? When there's a oil rig pulling oil out the land across the street? How are we gonna talk to somebody about a straw, right? So the way we talk to them about a straw is the full life cycle of plastics. Because the reality is those straws are being produced through the oil production that is in our communities. The extraction of oil is related to these plastic products. The refining of this oil is related to the plastic products. The manufacturing of these plastics, all of that is in our communities, right? The storage, the movement of these plastics is all in our communities, right? They sell it all over the place, and then once it goes into the trash, that trash is coming back to our communities. It's being sorted in our communities. It's being burned in the incinerators in our communities, right? So we're seeing the full life cycle from the extraction to the incineration. We're seeing it. That's why it makes sense to end plastics, right? Question, how have y'all been including the topic of disability with single-use plastics? That isn't a particular topic that I've been engaged in. The coalition that we're part of, there's a subsection of folks who are dealing with that. Everyone kind of has their own responsibilities. And so I know that is something that's been brought up and folks are working to address that specifically. So yeah, so we're changing some of the conversation around plastics, right? And the plastics isn't just about straws. There's a lot of issues of plastics beyond straws, right? So we had a coalition meeting and folks were basically like, yo, so it was awkward as fuck, to be honest. Folks were like, not really sure we should even be talking about this through COVID-19, right? And that's because, is that the priority? And so for me, I'm like, well, where are the alternatives to plastics going to be manufactured? Is it possible to manufacture them here in LA? Because if we can manufacture them here in LA, then that's employment opportunities for folks as part of a recovery for the Rona, right? Because folks are going to need to go back to work. And you know what? That means we need workforce development for our communities. And that means we need local hire commitments so our folks can get access to these jobs. And that's how we connected to these multiple issues that we're facing in our communities, right? Again, I'm running low on time, so I'm not going to get too much into some of this other stuff. Unless somebody has a question about something they just read on here, I can come back to that later. So I think here's a bunch of questions I have for us to talk about right now, which is looking beyond the Rona, looking beyond the recovery, because the recovery is going to be about restabilizing capitalism. That's going to be the government response. The government response is all going to be about how do we restabilize capitalism. And so since we've recognized capitalism as a fundamental issue for the sustainability of people on the planet, that means we shouldn't be returning to that. We shouldn't be reinforcing that, right? So the questions that I want to kind of throw out there for folks to engage with are, what does societal change beyond the recovery look like, right? What are the cracks in the system that we can apply pressure to in this moment, right? And I think it's important to understand what immediate needs must be addressed, and also what community and movement-based systems can we generate outside of the state that we can perpetuate beyond the recovery, right? And it's about resistance, but it's also about persistence. So I don't know if we're gonna have time to talk about all that because I went really long and originally thought your class was a little longer. But just to give y'all quick announcements for the end of this, hashtag EYCEJ Toxic Tuesdays is how we're engaging a lot of folks through social media right now to be able to talk about these issues that we're facing on the front lines. So they're happening every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Using our EYCEJ profile on Instagram Live. The first one was this past Tuesday. You might still be able to watch it. I'm not sure if it's still on. If not, we're going to figure out how to put subtitles in Spanish and add it to YouTube. And then the next one is coming up this coming Tuesday at 2 p.m. And we're engaging really dope folks from within our organization and also folks outside of our organization. So I'm going to end it there, and facilitators can handle that. How do I stop share?
Okay, thank you so much, Mark, for sharing. Sorry we had to cut it a bit shorter, but if you want to send us your presentation like you were saying, we could for sure have that sent out to everybody so we could engage a bit more in that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I know that like some people were kind of asking questions in the chat. If anybody has a question right now, we're just going to make some time for that. Also, like chat monitor folks, if you want to ask questions too or like direct it to others, go off.
There's a question in the chat from Alex, I believe is how you pronounce that. The question is, as an activist, how do you keep yourself from burning out? Sometimes you burn out, and that's just real, right? I think there's a lot of like self-care culture now. That like when I was a student activist, that's all I did. I didn't even buy books at a certain point. Because I took an education class and they taught me about the Benki method of education, that the teacher didn't think enough about the education system is set up so teachers think they need to put information into students. And so I'm like, cool, I'm gonna show up to lecture, tell me what you need me to know. I don't need to read because you're gonna tell me you don't trust that I'm gonna read, you don't trust that I'm gonna understand the reading, so you're gonna tell me what I need to know. So I would sit in class and then I'd be organizing all day into the night, wake up, go to class, and then organize all day into the night. And that's what I would do every day. So that it wasn't the most sustainable way of organizing, but to be honest, when I was in Santa Cruz, I didn't like being in Santa Cruz. It's just, and it was a trip is I didn't tell my parents, you know, I didn't tell nobody. The people who also were not liking Santa Cruz with me, they knew, but I had several breakdowns while I was in Santa Cruz. And most folks don't know that, right? And it was a very difficult place to survive. And so where I put my energy in is organizing. And where I put my frustration in is organizing. And where I put my hate is in organizing. And where I put my love is in organizing. I put everything I had, I put it into organizing. And it wasn't that big of an issue because what the fuck else was I going to do in Santa Cruz? Right? When I came home, that changed. When I came home, I understood that I needed to be more compassionate. I understood that I needed to find balance in ways that I'm not just going to be in meetings all day, every day. But for me, organizing isn't a job. It isn't a hobby. It isn't just something I do. It's something I am. It's a culture, right? And so I grew up in a certain culture, in a culture that taught me that the way that you're part of a community is by contributing to that community. And if you're not contributing to the community, you're not part of the community. That's what I grew up in. That's what I know. That's the way I see the world. Right? There's a lot more to share there, but I think through having that worldview, it allows me to do what I do in a more sustainable way, because my family is my family, right? I'm organizing my neighbors. I'm organizing my babies. I'm organizing my friends. I'm organizing, right? Like I'm organized by my friends. I'm organized by my neighbors. I'm organized by my family, right? So I think all of that allows for more sustainability, but then there is balance that needs to come out, because I play a certain position in the organization, which is executive director, and there's a lot of shit that I don't like to do. And so then how do I balance that out with, for example, some of the youth organizing activities that I'm involved with? That helps me stay connected. That helps me stay like feeling like what my investments are make a lot of sense, when sometimes some of my executive director responsibilities, that shit doesn't feel like pouring my energy into that is the most valuable. It's very effective, right? But it may not be the most valuable, right? So I think one of the things that we've implemented in the organization, because I'm not a fan of self-care, like the concept of self-care, it seems to come in a lot of ways, not from like ideas around self-preservation that are like around survival, but more around leisure and more around luxury. And that's troubling for me. And so what we've implemented in the organization is this concept of collective care. And the idea is, if everybody takes care of everyone, everybody's taken care of, right? Now, where that comes from is something my grandma taught me. She said that in Cantuna, Zacatecas, where we're from, it's a rural area to this day. There's only like 900 people in this town. She said that her family, her mother would kill a pig, right? And she would slaughter the pig, and she'd basically cut up the parts and put it in baskets. And then she would tell my grandma, take this basket to that neighbor. And this is like a rural area in 1930s Mexico, right? So the neighbor isn't next door. The neighbor is like on the other side of the hill, around the river bend, right? Like wherever. So she would go do that. She'd come back, and my great grandma would have another basket for her. So then she would go take that basket and then come back and another basket. So all day she'd be delivering baskets. And so she says that all day she was seeing her favorite parts of the pig were being given away. So at one point, she tells my great grandma, like, why are we giving all of this away? Why don't we just eat all of this ourselves? And my great grandmother responded, if we give everything to everyone, everyone will give everything to us. And that is a particular way of seeing the world, right? That is radically different from Western colonial ways of seeing the world. In America, why do you work hard? You work hard for yourself, right? You work hard to make money. You work hard to accumulate wealth. You work hard to have power, right? In the worldviews that I was raised with, you work hard for your community. That's what you work hard for. You work hard to give. You don't work hard to take, right? That's a whole different way of seeing the world. And so for me, in a lot of ways, when I'm able to give, that's not draining for me. When I give my energy, when I give my time, that's not draining for me. That gives me energy. That gives me more time, right? Sorry, I took a cool minute on that question. What can we do individually to bring awareness of the fallacy of the narrative, the earth is healing? One concrete way to do that is share our hashtag, which is hashtag toxic business as usual. No. Yeah? Toxic business as usual. That's our hashtag. Let me put it right here so we got it. Hashtag toxic business as usual. Also hashtag EYCEJ Toxic Tuesdays. Share that, tune in. You'll find some really dope info, especially if you're from the LA area. This next one, the external guest is going to feature a Tongva sister. Again, the Tongva are the indigenous group here from LA. who's a badass water protector. So y'all should definitely tune into that. So sharing that out is a good way to kind of push back on that narrative. Cool. I don't know if I see any other questions. If folks got other questions, it'd be cool to hear people's voices too. It's kind of weird to just talk and not hear people.
Hey, Mark. Yeah, I actually have an extra question. Do you know or are aware of any like dope orgs that are doing like similar work in the Bay Area for people who are up in Northern California?
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know who this is because I can't see everybody. Who was that?
Amy.
Cool. Thank you, Amy. What part of the Bay Area? The Bay Area is huge.
Yeah, I have a friend asking from San Jose. I'm trying to get some connections out there.
San Jose. I don't know folks from San Jose. There's some folks in the East Bay that I fuck with who are doing work around democratizing energy. And they are called, message me and I'll get you the name. I'm forgetting the name right now because it's like the East Bay, some. I'm not fully remembering the name, but they're basically trying to get energy to be in the hands of community and not to be in the hands of these large energy corporations that are basically, again, exploiters and have recently been the reasons for a lot of the wildfires in California, and are looking to have us pay for their failures. Because the reason why their infrastructure is failing is because they're not investing in the infrastructure. The reason they're not investing in the infrastructure is because they're trying to maximize profits. And so if the power is in the hands of communities as opposed to these corporations, then it's not going to be about the accumulation of wealth. It's going to be about the maintenance of a system that serves, right? Which is radically different. So yeah, hit me up, send me a message, and then we can engage and I can connect you with somebody.
Thank you.
For sure.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for answering those questions beautifully. Eiley, do you want to take it away with the midterm prompt?
Yeah, thank you so much for everyone who's still staying here. Also, Mark, are you gonna be staying afterwards? I just have a couple questions. I just don't want to hold everybody up. But
for sure, I'll be right here.
All right, for sure. Thank you. But yeah, so we're gonna be talking about the midterm. If like someone could pull up the screen. Oh God. For like so we can be talking about it. The midterm can be found on the syllabus, and it's going to be due next week when we meet, and also the reflections are going to be due. Yeah, the midterm prompt will be there, and I suggest for everybody to check it out. And then also a part of the midterm is we're also going to be having midterm check-ins with your facilitators, and there's going to be links for you to sign up for like a specific time slot for your specific art. And yeah, anything else I may be missing?
There's also going to be the midterm different Zoom links sent out to you all so that you're like with the facilitators during that time. And some co-facilitators are deciding to like split up during that time or to do it together just based on like their timing for themselves. Because then, yeah, so just like check out for your facilitators and feel free to ask them questions if you have any confusion about like the way that this midterm is going to go at all.
Yeah, and then also there's a Google form for some speaker feedback if you want to give back. any feedback about like our speakers that we've had, like people that you've liked, things that you have not liked, that you didn't really fuck with, like let us know. I think that's also can be found on the syllabus. It's gonna be, yeah. And
were you finishing up, Eileen?
What else? Oh yeah, I feel like really, wait, am I finishing up yes, finishing up about.
Oh no, you froze. I didn't know if you were frozen, if you were still talking. Sorry.
Oh no, that's okay. Yeah. Yeah, let me know if I'm missing anything. The Google form for the speaker feedback. Just should check that out, fill it out.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, and if you guys are really jazzed about like the talk that we had today, I would highly suggest for everyone to check out the Filipina X people's art. They talk a lot of similar things about this, like environmental racism, prejudice, injustices that are happening with POC folks, and, you know, systematic oppression. Yeah, so I would highly suggest for you to check them out. There's some fantastic people there. Yeah, anything else to add?
That's it. Yeah, thank you all so much for sticking around too. We see you 29 people. Yeah, hope y'all have a great rest of your day. Mark, I think you said that you're going to be staying around a little bit just to answer some questions.
For sure.
Yeah. Hope y'all have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much for being here, and thank you so much, Mark, for being here and for bringing yourself and your knowledge and wisdom into this space.
Yeah, thank y'all.